in partnership with The Advocate, our local newspaper. And I am Matt Roberts, and I will be your news reader this morning. Bruce is taking a little break to play pickleball, I think it's called. And you may hear my cat as he's meowing at me. And yeah, so we are going to read you some news this morning from The Advocate. And our first story is dealing with the COVID-19 coronavirus. The latest information is lawmakers paid despite shutdown. And this story is by Mark Ballard. Each received $161 daily payments, even though Capitol was closed for 49 days. This year's legislative session may not have convened every day, but lawmakers are receiving the full $198 million in per diem payments, even though the state capitol was closed for 49 days because of the coronavirus pandemic. Each of the 144 lawmakers receives $161 for each day the legislature is in session. That's on top of their $16,800 annual salary. The per diem payments, which will total $13,865 per legislator for the 2020 legislative session are to reimburse lawmakers for expenses while in Baton Rouge, according to the law. Legislators also receive up to $6,000 annually for unvouchered expenses, and some receive mileage for their drive to and from Baton Rouge. Legislative compensation has always been a controversial issue, and lawmakers have taken different tacks on the payments. I don't want to get paid if I'm not working, State Senator Brett Allen, Republican Franklin, said Wednesday. But I took more phone calls when I was away than when I was here. I also met here once a week with staff to discuss what we're going to do with surplus money. Rookie state representative Chuck Owen, Republican Rosepine, is unsure whether he'll keep the money. I kept the money aside. I didn't know if I had been overpaid, he said. State Representative Michael Eccles, Republican Monroe, told the Ouachita Citizen newspaper that he had collected $10,414 in per diem payments and travel outlays during the recess. He said he may donate the money to the University of Louisiana at Monroe. Annual sessions are set in law and during even-numbered years allow 60 days of meetings during an 85 calendar day period. This year, the session convened on March 9th and must adjourn by 6 p.m. June 1st. Lawmakers worked a week after convening, which coincided with the first time a Louisiana resident tested positive for the novel coronavirus. The House and Senate then suspended the session March 16th, and except for an hour on March 31st to handle some legalities, stayed out of the state capitol. The session reconvened Monday. Legislators are being paid for 85 days and will be paid more if a special session is called, as several legislative leaders have hinted might happen after this session adjourns. During the missing 49 days, lawmakers were paid about $7,889, or about $1.2 million for the entire body. Because the legislature was considered in recess, like what happens on weekends in usual gatherings. But more to the point, said Senate President Paige Cortez, the state constitution specifically prohibits the reduction of an elected public official's compensation during the elected term. To withhold per diem prior to the sine die of the session would be a direct violation of the Constitution and state law, Cortez, Republican Lafayette, said Wednesday. House Speaker Clay Schexnayder, Republican Gonzalez, was too busy with back-to-back meetings Wednesday to respond to questions about per diem payments, according to his spokesman. Beyond the legalities, Louisiana pays its legislators far less than other states pay their assemblies, said Senator Sharon Hewitt, a Republican who, as a chairwoman of the Senate and Governmental Affairs Committee, is on the Legislative Budgetary Control Council, the joint panel that oversees spending in the House and Senate. Hewitt lives 90 minutes away in Slidell and must rent a Baton Rouge apartment year-round. My husband says I spend more money on this job than we make, said Hewitt. Making those comparisons between states isn't easy. Texas pays its 31 state senators and 150 state representatives a salary of $7,200 a year, but tax on $221 per diem whenever they show up in Austin for session or committee hearings that go on almost year-round. Arkansas pays $41,394 annually and $149 per diem for some lawmakers, $55 for others, depending on how far they live from Little Rock. Maryland pays legislators $50,330 per year, but specifically covers up to $106 per day for lodging and $47 per day for meals, which is but a fraction of the cost in expensive Annapolis. We only adjourned for a period of time, said Port Allen Republican Senator Rick Ward, taking note of the law. There was not a day that went by when people were not attending conference calls. I would compare it to somebody whose bricks and mortar office closed, but they sent everyone home with laptops and their work continued. I was in Skype calls, video chats, Zoom calls all day, every day, said State Senator Regina Barrow, a Baton Rouge Democrat who lives about 6 miles from the Capitol, so doesn't receive mileage. I had to create a space in my home and I sit in that space all day from 7:30 in the morning until 8 p.m. at night. My husband had to slip me sandwiches. All right, and our next story, legislature takes first step towards squashing stay-at-home order. House panel okays resolution removing Edwards' ability to enforce restrictions, by Sam Carlin, staff writer for The Advocate. Republican lawmakers, frustrated with continued business closures, took the first step toward undercutting Governor John Bel Edwards' stay-at-home order Wednesday, aiming to revoke the Democrats' ability to enforce restrictions in place to stem the spread of the new coronavirus. After a tense, hours-long hearing, the House and Governmental Affairs Committee approved a resolution by State Representative Blake Miguez, the chairman of the House Republican delegation, to remove Edwards' ability to enforce restrictions on businesses and residents. Instead, it would urge and request local officials to institute federal guidance for reopening, which calls for a slow easing of restrictions, starting with allowing some businesses to open with strict social distancing in place. The intent of this is to take the teeth out of his executive order, Miguez said of House Concurrent Resolution 58, adding that he strongly believes certain parishes are ready to reopen. The measure appeared aimed to force Edwards' hand to begin reopening businesses in mid-May, when the governor has said the first phase of reopening could begin, and it revealed more cracks in the relationship between Democratic governor and the deeply Republican legislature, as partisan divisions returned to the state capitol after a largely unified front at the beginning of the outbreak. If Edwards begins reopening businesses in mid-May, Miguez indicated he may drop the effort. But in the meantime, Republicans set the effort in motion in case Edwards doesn't lift restrictions to their liking. Miguez received legal advice on his legislation from Republican Attorney General Jeff Landry's office. The governor's office blasted the measure, saying it risked hampering the governor's efforts to respond to emergencies and enforce things like school closures. Matthew Block, Edwards' executive counsel, noted local officials would not be required to institute any rules for reopening, meaning some places could let businesses return to normal operations, a prospect that is widely panned by public health experts. We know there's going to be mass confusion and a hodgepodge response in the biggest public health disaster in probably 100 years, Block said. Jim Wascom, head of governor's office, Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, said it would bring chaos and confusion to an already chaotic and confusing situation. The committee, which is stacked with Republicans, voted 9-7 to advance the resolution to the full House. It would also need approval in the Senate to become effective. Although the stay-at-home order was supported by several conservatives, often at odds with Edwards, the administration has drawn the ire of a wide swath of Republicans for its handling of the extension. In particular, lawmakers have expressed frustration that they learned about Edwards' extension just minutes before he announced it April 27th, even after the governor repeatedly indicated the state would likely start reopening May 1st. Speaker Pro Tem Tanner McGee, a Homer Republican, said he was concerned the legislature was having a hard time getting information, such as modeling data from the administration, and he grilled Block on what McGee described as broken lines of communication. Several Republicans who also advocated for parish-by-parish approach to reopening, including Miguez. The governor cited regional data in justifying the continued stay-at-home order, but has rejected opening up the state by region so far. Some Republicans also said Wednesday that they were upset the governor and State Fire Marshal Butch Browning recently announced a website that gives businesses guidance on reopening and lets residents report businesses that are violating the stay-at-home order. Miguez called it a tattletale website, and Representative Danny McCormick, a Republican from Oil City who organized a recent protest outside the governor's mansion, likened it to snitching. Before the measure passed, Miguez amended it to try to allay concerns that the resolution, which originally would have revoked the governor's ability to declare an emergency, would hamper Edwards' ability to respond to natural disasters. With the changes, the measure would instead block his ability to enforce his order. Under the measure, local officials are urged and requested to issue proclamations and executive orders to institute restrictions outlined by President Donald Trump's administration. The resolution now goes to the full House, where it needs 53 votes in support before heading to the Senate. Edwards said he is following the White House guidance for reopening, arguing the state did not meet the thresholds for Phase 1 at the beginning of May. Earlier this week, Edwards said, "It is his hope and expectation the state will start reopening on May 16th, and he's set to make an announcement Monday." Miguez indicated his goal could be accomplished if that happens. "I'm going to continue to bring this forward as long as we have a stay-at-home order in place," Miguez said. A group of conservative Republicans who often feud with the governor, led by State Representative Alan Seabaugh, have also pushed a separate petition that would revoke the state's emergency declaration entirely. The governor's office warned such a move would put billions in federal aid at risk. Still, some Republicans on the House and Governmental Affairs Committee told Miguez his measure didn't go far enough, and said the legislature should back the petition. Legislative leaders have backed away from the petition because of warnings about its impact on federal aid. The state's stay-at-home order, which shutters bars, casinos, and gyms, and adds a host of other restrictions to businesses and residents, was set to expire April 30th. But epidemiologists and public health experts recommended Edwards extend it, warning the state was not ready to reopen safely. Since the virus was discovered in Louisiana in early March, the state has stayed near the top of the list in U.S. states for the number of cases per capita. The state also has an outsized death toll, something health officials are investigating. If Louisiana moves to reopen May 16th, restaurants could begin modified dine-in services, and barbershops, salons, and churches could open all at 25% occupancy. Edwards has, in recent days, pointed to the state's ability to test and track more people. And our next story, homeowners looking for relief on mortgages find pitfalls, by Kristen Brucker, staff writer. Homeowner Lori Stickles, who lost her Lafayette area job and whose husband hours were drastically cut, sought delayed payments on their mortgage as a precaution, but still is paying on the loan to avoid being hit with a lump sum bill for $4,212 in June when the 3-month forbearance period is over. For New Orleans resident Christina Sanchez Tyson and her husband, the lump sum would have been $6,000, so they decided against mortgage forbearance and are continuing payments to a lender that refused to negotiate moving the payments to the end of their loan. This seemed to entirely defeat the purpose and does not offer financial relief. If I were to not have the amount for 1 month, what makes them think that I could come up with the amount for 3 months if the hardship continued, said Tyson, who works remotely in her job, but whose husband's restaurant hours were severely cut. If we had really lost our second income completely, it would have been very stressful and challenging to avoid the balloon payment. Baton Rougian Heather Banks and her husband are making payments after their lender failed to send them agreed-to forbearance paperwork. Also from Baton Rouge, Nora Skakri, who teaches yoga classes and is a massage therapist, and her husband are making partial mortgage payments as best they can, even though forbearance was approved by their lender. She's doing some online sessions, but mostly is out of work because of the state-imposed shutdown of non-essential businesses and stay-at-home order issued in mid-March to contain the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. To keep mortgage payments going, the homeowners are cobbling together savings, unemployment checks, or federal relief funds they've received to prevent being hit with a huge lump sum bill, which could potentially be avoided if lenders eventually are willing to alter the terms of their mortgages. Stickles isn't taking any chances with her mortgage servicer. She's already tried negotiating, asking that several months of payments be added to the end of the loan, which she initially thought was approved. We were given incomplete information. then have to scramble, Stickles said. We specifically asked about that, but they made it a balloon payment anyway. They said they had to put it like that, but they would talk to us later and maybe put it at the end or just bump up monthly payments. Like Louisiana homeowners, an estimated 3.8 million homeowners across the country are living not only on borrowed money but also borrowed time. About 7.5% of home mortgages across the U.S. were in forbearance as of April 26. In early March, before the onslaught of the coronavirus pandemic, less than 1% of home mortgages were in forbearance, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association National Survey. And that number is expected to grow in May. State-level data was not available, but the two largest independent mortgage servicers in Louisiana, GMFS LLC and Assurance Financial, estimate that more than 5% of their loans have been approved for forbearance so far. Even if borrowers are off the hook for payments for a few months, the money is still due. Those payments are contractually still due at the end of 90 days. The borrower either pays all 3 months or they are evaluated for further forbearance and various loan modification options, said T. Brown, Chief Financial Officer of Baton Rouge-based GMFS LLC. Some options are available to negotiate with lenders. A loan modification would change the terms of the loan. That potentially could lower the monthly payment, but the recalculated loan and the arrears added to the balance might make monthly payments go up. A repayment plan could allow past due payments to be spread out over the term of the loan by adding them to the current mortgage balance. A loan extension could add the past due payments to the back end of the loan. Money is already tight, and many of the Stickleys' bills, ranging from flood insurance to groceries, are getting put on credit cards. Lori Stickles said she recently started receiving unemployment benefits, and the couple received federal stimulus checks that Congress approved for individuals of $1,200 each. The couple has been making mortgage payments to avoid the lump sum option using the stimulus money. Lori Stickles is looking for another job in the meantime. Just in case, she's already thinking of other options in a worst-case scenario. I'm not even thinking foreclosure at this point, Stickles said. We have retirement accounts that we can hit up before that happens. Incidentally, those accounts took a huge hit with the stock market crash, so it's less than we would have liked. The naturalist educator, who doesn't expect to go back to work until August, and her husband, a crane operator in the hard-hit offshore oil and gas industry, actually have 2 mortgages right now. The other is on an old house the couple has been trying to sell, but the market has been down. Fortunately, the delayed mortgage payments for that house are being moved to the end of the loan by its mortgage servicer. The intent of all this is to prevent foreclosure. The last thing any servicer wants to do is foreclose, said Brown of GMFS. Even if you can't make your full mortgage payment, pay some of it if you can. Under the federally approved Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, homeowners were provided with 2 types of protection. A foreclosure moratorium prevents lenders or loan servicers from beginning or proceeding with a foreclosure for 60 days. That started March 18th. The CARES Act also allows homeowners experiencing coronavirus-related financial difficulties to request an initial forbearance of up to 180 days. An extension for another 180 days can be sought. Interest still accrues, but the fees and penalties are waived. Many lenders have gone with an initial 90-day forbearance period. The CARES Act forbearance provisions apply to mortgages that are federally owned or backed by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Federal Housing Administration, Department of Agriculture, or Department of Veteran Affairs. Each type of loan has guidelines for forbearance. For example, a conventional loan can be in forbearance for up to a year. Otherwise, investors holding mortgages not backed by the federal government set the terms of any assistance or loan relief. When a mortgage is in forbearance, that's not supposed to affect the borrower's credit score, but missed payments outside of that agreement could. GMFS leadership expects the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic to cause more borrowers to seek forbearance than after the 2016 flood in Louisiana, when about 7% of its mortgages were in forbearance. That's the trend Assurance Financial is seeing as well. We are seeing more demand for forbearance relief today than during the disaster, said Kenny Hodges, CEO of Assurance Financial. We're expecting numbers between 12% to 18% when it's all said and done. The executive encouraged borrowers who are not facing financial hardship to continue paying home loans if they can. That's what Banks and her husband are doing. The Baton Rouge residents were approved for forbearance through their bank for at least 3 months and up to 6 months before the loan is modified. However, the bank never sent the forbearance paperwork, a mistake that's frustrating to Banks. So she's holding off as long as she can. Banks said she was laid off from a small business that sells copiers, and she has dipped into savings to pay the mortgage. She recently went back to work after her employer was approved for a federal Paycheck Protection Program loan, designed to keep employers' workforces intact and on the payroll until the national economy revives. Her husband works as a tankerman in the oil and gas industry, which is considered an essential business. I will just continue to pay as it's not worth getting into arrears. I have savings, Banks said of her mortgage. It's tight, but okay. We thought about mortgage forbearance, but in the end we just want to stay level, she said. So far, the couple fared far worse after the 2016 flood. Heather Banks had lost a previous job and took a $20,000 pay cut. They are still paying off a loan from the flood. I feel we will rebound quickly from this, but the flood still hurts, Heather Banks said. This is more of a hiccup, not a soul crusher. We are simply being beyond cautious with our budget and hoping that we can ride it out without altering anything to our loan and bills, Tyson in New Orleans said. Her husband qualified for state unemployment. In addition to the federal boost, which has been helpful, stimulus checks also have helped the couple. But if the economy doesn't rebound after that money runs out, it would be a tight squeeze, she said. Skakri, who has managed to make partial payments on her mortgage, offers wellness services in Baton Rouge. In addition to teaching yoga classes and being a massage therapist, she's been out of work more than a month under state restrictions that closed non-essential businesses like hers. Skakri was finally approved for federal unemployment benefits after weeks in limbo and more recently got approval for a federal Paycheck Protection Program loan as an independent contractor so she can have some income while her businesses are on hold. She was approved through her bank during the second round of federal funding. I was off to a very busy start this year, Skakri said of her business before the coronavirus outbreak. Since then, she's gone from working upward of 6 days a week with about 30 clients to a handful of virtual sessions. Some clients have paid for future sessions to help with cash flow. She had been living day by day and doesn't have savings to fall back on, but the situation has improved significantly. She hopes to start seeing clients before the end of May, depending on state orders that recently extended restrictions through May 15th. I'm a bit torn about it. I'm ready to go back to work, but I don't want to see a second wave of cases, she said. In the meantime, she's used some of the federal loan to purchase an ultraviolet light to sterilize rooms between uses by clients, and also supplies to allow her to do home visits when allowed, in addition to paying herself and rent at the studio. About 3 months of car loan payments were pushed back to the end of a loan after she negotiated with the company. Her mortgage is in forbearance and would face about a $3,000 lump sum, but the goal is to avoid that. She made 2 partial payments for April and is prepared to do the same for May with the federal support. A load was taken off my shoulders, she said about the financial support. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee here. Pardon me for just a second. That is good coffee. All right. 85% of women's dorm inmates infected at St. Gabriel Prison. Most affected showed no symptoms. By Leah Skeen, staff writer for The Advocate. Results from a rare example of mass testing conducted last month at a women's prison facility in St. Gabriel add to a growing collection of evidence that many more people could have been infected with the novel coronavirus than the current testing data suggests. About 85% of the roughly 200 inmates housed in the women's dorms at Elaine Hunt Correctional Center have tested positive for the virus, but about 3/4 of those confirmed cases were asymptomatic, according to the state corrections officials. Medical testing is focused almost exclusively on people experiencing symptoms, which could be painting an incomplete picture of how the virus is transmitted and how widely it has already spread. Although the prison testing does not provide a representative sample that can be used to draw significant conclusions about the virus, how the virus behaves in the outside world, it does present an example of the hidden spread that experts believe is occurring both beyond bars and among members of the public. We've seen research showing that a large portion of people will never show symptoms, and we found them at the prison, said Dr. Catherine O'Neill, an infectious disease specialist at Our Lady of the Lakes Regional Medical Center in Baton Rouge. It isn't clear how often people become infected but remain asymptomatic. Those studies have produced estimates ranging from 25% to 80% of cases. That's why health officials ask everyone to wear face masks in public and take other precautions, even as businesses reopen and social distancing requirements become less stringent. There may be a silver lining in the prison testing data, O'Neill said. In some ways, these numbers are reassuring to me because this suggests coronavirus behaves like all these other viruses we're more familiar with, she said. What makes the coronavirus particularly dangerous right now is the lack of immunity among members of the public. But O'Neill said that doesn't mean that this is something that goes above and beyond all other viruses, even though it's causing a pandemic. Corrections officials recently decided to conduct mass testing at the St. Gabriel prison after dozens of women, all housed in the same building, were experiencing coronavirus symptoms and had tested positive. The prison is among just a handful of places across the state where asymptomatic people have been tested en masse, though Governor John Bel Edwards announced last week his plans to expand such testing in close-quarter environments, including other prisons and nursing homes. That announcement came as U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said people with no symptoms but who live in congregate settings should be prioritized for tests. The CDC also released a report Wednesday acknowledging the prevalence of coronavirus outbreaks in American jails and prisons and recommending steps such as facilities should take to minimize the spread. At least 4 state inmates and 3 prison employees have died from the coronavirus, and almost 500 others have tested positive across the entire state prison system, according to the latest Department of Public Safety and Corrections data. The inmates housed in the women's dorms at Elaine Hunt alone account for almost half the total number of cases among all inmates and corrections staff statewide, which raises questions about how many asymptomatic cases are going uncounted in other state prison facilities where widespread testing isn't available. Test results from the women's prison have also contributed to a spike in cases for St. Gabriel and the surrounding area, which now has the highest number of cases reported in any single census tract across the state. When factoring in population, the number of cases per capita in that census tract is more than 3.5 times the statewide average, according to an Advocate analysis of statewide numbers. Louisiana health officials started releasing case counts by census tract in recent weeks and confirmed that the state inmates are counted based on location of their prison, though there appears to be a possible lag in time in the reporting process that could mean some cases are missing from the current data. The state's female prisoners are housed at various facilities, including the building at Hunt and former Jetson Center for Youth, a previously closed juvenile detention center in Baker because the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women flooded in 2016 hasn't been rebuilt. Due to continual increase of positive tests and the high percentage of COVID-19 positives at LCIW Hunt, the department thought it prudent to test everyone there to determine whether there was were asymptomatic cases. Corrections Department spokesman Ken Pastoric said in a statement. He said the women's dormitories at Hunt typically house 195 inmates, though the number fluctuates slightly because of transfers or hospitalizations. At least 165 of those women have tested positive in recent weeks, with about 3/4 of the confirmed cases never resulting in symptoms, according to state data. The Corrections Department declined to comment on the test results themselves. A spokesman for the Louisiana Department of Health, which oversees testing, said the department cannot comment on the health of individuals at correctional facilities, though he also noted that state health officials support increased testing in congregate settings and will adhere to federal guidelines on the issue. A widespread lack of testing has been a defining feature of the nation's response to the pandemic, though more test kits are becoming available, allowing CDC officials to loosen criteria for who can get tested. The high positivity rate suggests that there are likely many more people with COVID-19 who are not being tested, and in jails and prisons, this lack of testing is often accompanied by a lack of access to care, with deadly results, said Dr. Homer Venters, former chief medical officer at New York City's Rikers Island Jail. Other experts in prison healthcare said the test results are alarming but unsurprising. Mass testing of inmates in other states has similarly found high percentages of asymptomatic carriers. This confirms what we feared and expected based on hundreds of years of public health research and what we know about correctional environments, said Dr. Mark Stern, former medical director for the Washington State Department of Corrections, who now teaches at the University of Washington School of Public Health. These are places where people live, sleep, eat, and recreate in close proximity. And infections are going to spread quickly through places like that. This is not a new realization. Stern and others cautioned against using data from prison settings to make predictions about how the virus is spreading in the outside world. Those are two very different places, he said, noting that the data should instead be used to inform how officials respond to outbreaks behind bars. I hope Louisiana authorities are learning from what happened here. All right, and our next story by Ben Myers, a staff writer at The Advocate. Daily average of new cases increasing. Acadiana region caseload climbs to 1,452. The rolling 7-day average of new coronavirus cases in Acadiana did not decrease Wednesday for the 6th consecutive day, with 21 new reported cases in the region. The new cases brought the total known caseload in the 7-parish region to 1,452, resulting in 121 deaths. The death count in the region remained at 121, the same as the previous day, according to the state's daily update. The average number of new cases reported in Acadiana in the past 7 days stood at 19.86 on Wednesday. That's the highest it's been since April 28th, when the daily average of new cases over the previous week was 22.43. On April 29, the rolling weekly average had dropped on 5 of the previous 7 days. On Wednesday, it had increased or remained flat for 6 days in a row. It's not clear if the recent daily average increase signals a reversal or plateauing of the overall trend in Acadiana's coronavirus cases, which trended downward consistently starting in the middle of April. Louisiana Department of Health's Regional Director Tina Stefanski did not respond to a query on the rolling weekly averages. The new cases Wednesday were almost equally spread among 5 of the region's 7 parishes: Lafayette, St. Martin, St. Landry, Iberia, and Acadia, all added 4 or 5 new cases. Evangeline and Vermilion saw no change. Testing is increasing in Acadiana, although it's hard to say if that's the reason for the recent increases in the rolling 7-day average. The 1,452 confirmed Acadiana cases represent a 6.8% positive test rate, which is less than half of the statewide rate of 15.6. The World Health Organization has established a 10% positive rate as a benchmark for adequate testing capacity. In Lafayette, the largest parish in the Acadiana region, the positive test rate on Wednesday was 4.8%, which Mayor President Josh Guillory underscored in a news briefing. Our parish continues to do well relative to the rest of our region and our state, Guillory said of Lafayette's testing capacity. All right, and Lafayette General begins antibody testing. This is a staff report from the Advocate. Lafayette General began offering voluntary antibody testing for the novel coronavirus to its employees this week and will later roll out testing for patients. The antibody test can determine if a person's immune system has created antibodies in response to COVID-19. Presence of the IgG antibody indicates the person has been infected with COVID-19. Lafayette General announced in a statement Wednesday that it will offer the lab-based test to all 4,500 plus employees and nearly 1,200 providers across its health system. It's important to note that this test does not prove that a person is immune to future infection with COVID-19, Dr. Amanda Logue, a senior vice president and chief medical officer for Lafayette General, said in a prepared statement. Because this virus is new, there's not enough information at this time to determine what defines COVID-19 immunity and how long immunity may last. The lab-based serology blood test provided by Abbott tests for the detection of IgG antibody to identify if a person has had the virus is administered by a simple blood draw, and results will be provided within 24 to 48 hours of collection. We understand tests like this could create a false sense of security, Logue said. It is critical that everyone, regardless of test status or result, continues to follow the latest social distancing, protection, equipment, and infection control measures. Everyone should continue washing their hands, clean high-touched areas, and staying home when they are sick. Once the majority of its employees, providers, and community physicians have been tested, Lafayette General will expand testing to patients. Patients will need an order from their doctor to receive the lab test and should not go to any Lafayette General Diagnostic Centers without an order. And I'll just take another sip of coffee here. Thanks for listening to Local News Live, a community service of AOC Community Media in partnership with The Advocate. Our next story. Police car stolen in Louisiana, later involved in Texas shooting. Unmarked vehicle left running in motel lot during investigation. By Katie Gagliano, staff writer. An unmarked Opelousas police vehicle was stolen during a narcotics investigation Tuesday and was later involved in a shooting in Port Arthur, Texas. The unit was taken from the Motel 6 parking lot in the 4100 block of Interstate 49 Service Road about 10:20 a.m. Tuesday, while detectives were investigating narcotics activity at the motel. The unmarked vehicle contained a detective's body armor and an AR-15 patrol rifle, Opelousas Police Department spokesman Major Mark Guidry said. The vehicle was running at the time of the theft, he said. The officer had hurriedly exited the vehicle and entered the motel to assist in the narcotics investigation, the spokesman said. Several arrests were made in the incident. It's undetermined if the suspected thief was linked to the narcotics activity or if the theft was a matter of poor circumstances. The person may have been close by, saw an opportunity, and jumped in the vehicle, Guidry said. The vehicle was reported missing to surrounding law enforcement agencies and state police, and the unit was spotted on Interstate 10 near Rain about 20 minutes after the theft was discovered. Several hours later, roughly 150 miles away, Port Arthur Police Chief Timothy Duriso said the stolen vehicle was involved in 2 attempted robbery incidents, the second of which ended in the suspect's fatal shooting. The first incident happened about 6:30 p.m. in the parking lot of Island Grocery on Pleasure Island. The suspect, identified as Opelousas 25-year-old Leon Jones, The suspect, identified as Opelousas 25-year-old Leon Jones III, pulled a rifle on a victim sitting in a vehicle and attempted to steal the vehicle, but the driver managed to escape. A witness called police and Jones fled the scene, DeRiso said. About 3 or 4 miles down Texas in Texas 82 in Port Arthur, Jones stopped a Beaumont couple who were crabbing in the area and attempted to rob them, police said. The husband retrieved a firearm from their vehicle and the two exchanged gunfire. Jones was fatally struck, the chief said. The husband was uninjured, while his wife suffered minor cuts and injuries, possibly when a window in their vehicle was shattered during the shooting. She was treated at the scene by emergency medical personnel and released, DeRiso said. The chief said it's unclear why Jones was in the area or if he has any ties locally. We can't find any foot pattern. It's puzzling to us how he ended up in Port Arthur, Texas, over 2 hours away. We haven't found any personal ties to the area at this time, DeRiso said. The Opelousas police unit and the officer's rifle were recovered and have been logged as evidence. The Port Arthur Police Department is coordinating with the Jefferson County District's Attorney Office to determine when the items can be released pending conclusion of the final investigation, he said. Opelousas police officers traveled to Port Arthur on Wednesday to confer with local authorities, Guidry said. Officers believe Jones is the same person who originally stole the unmarked unit, but that is still being confirmed, he said. Surveillance footage of the suspect was captured at the Motel 6, but officers are determining if the footage quality is sufficient for an identification. DeRiso said officials suspect Jones was also involved in a theft incident near the Louisiana-Texas border in Calcasieu Parish, but more details are needed to make a confirmation. Our next story, a food service worker honored. St. Martin Parish employee recognized for commitment to students' healthy eating. And this is a staff report. A food service technician in St. Martin Parish has been recognized by a national organization as a Regional Employee of the Year. The National Nonprofit School Nutrition Association has awarded Tammy Belair, a food service worker at Early Learning Center in St. Martin Parish, the 2020 Southwest Regional Employee of the Year, according to a statement from the organization. The award recognizes the contribution of school nutrition. Bel Air employees who exhibit a commitment to their school meal program and the students they serve. Bel Air has worked in the same district for 23 years. She loves to brighten up students' days by giving out Valentine's Day cards or bee-bucks for students who identify vegetables, tell her about their benefits, or eat all of their vegetables. They can then use their bee-bucks to make campus purchases. She partners with teachers and uses flashcards to help students sound out words as they go through the lunch line. Bel Air also dresses up as different characters to increase school breakfast and lunch participation. She has purchased cafeteria decorations with her own money to provide a warm and fun environment for her students, according to the statement. To get kindergarten students excited about their meals, she conducts food demonstrations when they tour the cafeteria. She shows them how yeast rolls are made, and for students who harvest the school garden, she conducts hands-on salad-making demonstrations. Tammy Belair continues to go above and beyond her food service duties, helping to create a healthy and happy environment for her students and fellow staff members, said SNA President Gay Anderson. She continues to make a difference in the lives of her students and her community every day. The Employee of the Year was created to recognize outstanding school nutrition employees who influence the quality of school meals through their customer service, an interest in young people, cooperation, work attendance, creativity, participation in professional development, and their willingness to go above and beyond the call of duty. While the nomination process began before widespread COVID-19 school closures, SNA also recognizes the compassionate efforts of school nutrition employees as frontline heroes, ensuring students continue to have access to healthy meals. And this newsreader will raise his coffee mug to those frontline workers. Thank you. All right. what do we have next in our news? We're coming to the end. We're in the last 10 minutes, so I'll try and get in as many stories as possible. Just reminding you that this is a community service of AOC Community Media in partnership with the Advocate, and AOC is doing a lot right now to help keep people connected. Including airing a lot of educators' content that partners like the ACA and United Way have worked to put together, and all of our dedicated educators out there. So go to aocinc.org to learn how you can stay connected, either with your children's teachers or with your community in general, or how you can help out in that effort if you're able to help out. So yeah, thanks to United Way and ACA for that partnership, and again to all the dedicated educators out there who are doing their best to keep kids educated in this weird situation we're all in. All right, so our next story is Kennedy pitches loosening aid rules. Proposal would lift restrictions on money for states. This is by Bryn Stoll, staff writer. U.S. Senator John Kennedy is pushing legislation to loosen rules on how state and local governments can spend billions in federal coronavirus aid, potentially easing the massive budget shortfalls officials across Louisiana and the U.S. are now facing. Roughly $1.8 billion in federal aid is already headed to governments in Louisiana, where the economic fallout of the coronavirus and plunging oil prices have hit particularly hard. But that aid can only be spent directly on coronavirus response, not to fill growing budget holes and offset steep drops in tax revenue. Kennedy's proposal would lift those restrictions, allowing state and local governments to spend the money on a wide range of expenses and operating costs. It'd also eliminate the Kennedy end-of-year deadline to spend the federal funds. The states and cities could use the money to plug holes in their budget if this bill passes, Kennedy, a Republican from Madisonville, said of his draft legislation. State and local governments in Louisiana, like much of the rest of the country, are required to maintain balanced budgets, meaning sudden drops in tax revenue have to be quickly matched with cuts in government spending and services. Louisiana state economists are now trying to tally the potential hit to the state's coffers from the coronavirus crisis and the oil collapse. Official budget estimates won't be available until next week, but lawmakers have suggested the shortfall could be between $500 million and $1 billion. In New Orleans, where the coronavirus struck particularly hard and the tourism-driven local economy has suffered acutely, city officials are projecting gaps of between $130 million and $170 million. The city and parish leaders elsewhere in the state are also bracing for big hits to their budgets as the economic fallout from the pandemic depresses tax collections. But Kennedy, a former state treasurer, said although most of the nation's governors have called for another round of federal relief, he doesn't see additional federal aid flowing directly to state and local governments anytime soon. Kennedy also questioned the accuracy of budget projections, arguing that analysts won't be able to tally the damage until after the most immediate crisis is passed and parts of the economy are back up and running. U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, a fellow Louisiana Republican, has proposed $500 billion in additional federal help, along with Senator Bob Menendez, a New Jersey Democrat. Cassidy has argued generous federal aid now is essential to help power the economic recovery and avoid damaging cuts to essential services. Partisan divisions are deepening over the issue on Capitol Hill, however. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican Kentucky, suggested in late April that struggling states should consider bankruptcy instead of waiting on an additional federal relief. President Donald Trump has also questioned more direct federal aid, framing it as a potential bailout to states led by Democrats. Kennedy said most Senate Republicans oppose sending money to the states anytime soon, calling the relief that's already been passed by Congress a breathtaking amount of money and noting that it was being paid for with growing federal debt. Before we go write another check spending money we don't have for the states and the cities, we need to wait a while, Kennedy said. Every state and every municipality is going to have to share the sacrifice, though. They've got to scrub their budgets. We don't have enough money. Kennedy said he believes his proposal to give state and local leaders more flexibility with money already allocated might win wider backing. Kennedy said he floated the idea to other Republican senators at lunch on Wednesday, heard broad support, and guessed that Democrats wouldn't be opposed either. Whether it can win passage in a divided Congress where even non-controversial proposals frequently get caught in crosscurrents remains another question. Our next story. Through tragedy, Barnes gets UL offer. A verbal commitment, lost mom before last season. By Kevin Foote, a staff writer. The UL Ragin' Cajuns' first verbal commitment for the 2021 recruiting class was Logan Sport cornerback Keith Savalin Barnes last month. His high school coach, Kevin McGee, said it was a wise move for Coach Billy Napier's staff to corral Barnes early. He's convinced the aggressive defensive back will prove he's better than many expect over time. He's a great student and a very, very respectful young man with an incredibly high ceiling, McGee said. I think he's not even close to tapping the potential that he can be on the field. Barnes said being a rural Class 1A school tucked away in northwest Louisiana near the Texas border makes recruiting a little more difficult. But with the second reason Barnes might have been under-recruited is more earth-shattering. Just prior to his preseason scrimmage last August, Barnes' 35-year-old mother died of a sudden heart attack on a Tuesday morning. It was tough on everybody, McGee said. When you've got a kid like that you're really close with, and he's hurting as bad as you can possibly imagine, we've got to move forward, but we're also trying to be there for him and do what's best for him, and then try and do what's best for the team. It was a really unique situation. Naturally, Barnes didn't play in the scrimmage or the jamboree prior to his junior season. He even found football tough for much of the first 5 games of the season. I was very distracted, Barnes said. I just couldn't play my game. It brought me down, and I couldn't play the way I wanted to. As he worked his way through the grieving process, the coaching staff remained patient. We were supportive of him, McGee said. It was, hey man, you don't have to play football, come second to your family. I made sure he understood that. I was very apprehensive to force him to play and produce. I just let him come back at his own pace. You can try to fake it until you make it, but when something like this is on your mind 100% of the time, there's no way to focus, especially when it's your mother, he said. That doesn't mean it was easy. Barnes was much more than a starting cornerback for Logan Sport. He was the centerpiece of the team. He was the guy that we built our entire philosophy around in the offseason, McGee said. He was going to be the dude. He's the guy we were going to get the ball to. Then all of a sudden, he's not really going to be available for us, so we had to figure out who the next guy is. By midseason, McGee began seeing signs that the old Barnes was back. It just started clicking, and I began playing full of emotion, and I started playing my game again, Barnes said. As time went on, I began to play with a chip on my shoulder, and that made me work harder for everything. The team ended up surviving the turbulent start, reaching the state semifinals. As for recruiting, it didn't end up mattering much because McGee only needed one visit to make up his mind. At first I wanted to wait, but I just felt like UL was the program for me, Barnes said. I liked the energy in the program. Everyone was involved. I was hoping that everyone would show their interest in me, and they did. I was looking into UL before they even offered me. As soon as they offered me, I started studying their schemes and seeing how I fit in. After pulling down 4 interceptions as a sophomore, Barnes only had 1 in last fall's disrupted season, along with 42 tackles. But those numbers don't tell the whole story. Barnes describes himself as an open-field tackler, and his coach agrees. He's very, very physical, McGee said. He's the guy that when he gets to where he's going, he's got bad intentions. He's aggressive. He's physical enough. He's 6 foot, 190 pounds, and he can run 4.5 speed. He's not afraid to do damage when he gets there. There have been times when players on the other team weren't able to finish because of something that he did, he's impressive. McGee said Barnes could also play safety in college. He needs to work on creating more interceptions when the ball is in the air, McGee said. We've talked as a staff about teaching man coverage techniques a little better this fall. We're in an odd front defense, and we blitz a lot because we have somebody like him to follow whoever their guy is all over the field. He recovers really well and high points the ball. He's not deficient at all, but he can improve in that area. And that will conclude our news read for the day, listeners. We're probably over on TV already. They probably cut us off on TV, and that's okay. Got to move on to that important education content. But if you're listening on YouTube or on Cypress Street, we appreciate it. Tune in tomorrow when our volunteer news reader Bruce Cohen will be back on the mic for all you listeners. Thanks again to listening to Local News Live on AOC Community Media's various channels.